Hello, I'm Ed Rabyd, otherwise known as the Rabyd Atheist, former pastor turned atheist, now a compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Feel free to like or dislike the video as you see fit, so feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it is released. You're also free to share my videos as much as you like, because the purpose of this channel is educational in regards to deconversion and atheist issues, along with other related issues. Today I want to kind of bring everybody up to speed to where I am about the character of Jesus Christ as found in the scriptures. In the past, I have maintained that Jesus was probably maybe a person. Possibly there was a rabbi by the name of Jesus of Nazareth, so I had to concede that possibility. After all, historically, claiming that somebody actually exists and proving that they just existed is a pretty mundane claim. It doesn't actually take that much to prove somebody's existence. That said, the more I delved into Jesus and the more I listened to some of the mythicists about Jesus Christ, the more I realized that maybe Jesus Christ doesn't have even enough evidence to basically say that he existed. So I have to concede the point to the mythicists at some point. But I also don't think they have an ironclad case that he absolutely did not exist. I think, though, that there's probably a more likely scenario. I think that probably maybe there was various people that made the claim to Messianic, godhood status. And maybe the Gospels over the years was just a continuing addition of those various things. Like, all of a sudden somebody said, oh, you remember this Messianic figure, this? Well, no, actually that was Jesus, and we're going to add that on to later Gospels. I think the big thing that still remains for me, and it comes down to this question, was Jesus Christ a man? Was he a myth, or was he a legend? Now, a man means that he actually existed. So let's talk about Jesus' existence. The real problem with Jesus' existence is nobody outside of the Gospels or outside of the Christian Bible claims that Jesus actually existed. In fact, many of them don't even claim to have met him. And some of those authors are questionable or, quite frankly, anonymous, so we don't even know who they are. Anonymous authors aren't very helpful because we can't verify their existence, let alone their claims of who they claim existed. And so it becomes even more problematic to say that Jesus Christ was indeed a man that existed and lived. Other outside sources may talk about Jesus' followers, but they don't talk about the man himself. Josephus mentions the followers of Jesus, and he mentions some of their role in various things that led up to the revolution, and the destruction of the temple, but he doesn't really talk about Jesus, the man himself. Now, I suppose we could assume, because he says that Jesus Christ had followers, that Jesus Christ was indeed a person, but that claim is kind of weak, and it's obviously in an edited passage, which also makes it even more problematic. So the more I looked at it, the more I said, it's possible he was a man, it's possible he wasn't. See, where I'm going with this is the more I study Jesus, the more, quite frankly, it gets more and more nebulous as to who he was or what he did. And so I'm trying to figure out exactly how I can explain what I think happened. Now, I listen to other people about what they think happened. One of the best ones that I've ever heard is Apologia's theory, that it just takes Peter and Paul basically to make a claim to having seen the resurrection of Jesus, and then certain psychological realities, like people see their dead relatives all the time because of a heart desire. It's a known psychosis, where people get this hard desire to just see their relatives again, and then lo and behold, they do so. They create an image of them in their head. And that very well could have been what happened with these men. But that kind of also assumes that Jesus did indeed exist, and these two men were having either an experience or longing with something that they felt was the resurrection of Jesus through stress. It kind of lends credence to maybe that Jesus was a man, but also there's a lot of myth around this character. See, the thing I'm drawn to, and one of the more recent things that I've been talking about with Jesus, is this. I think that now the Gospels may be, because in my original series I talked about the tall tale of Jesus, and I likened it to a tall tale, where you have a real character, like John Henry, for instance. a steel-driving man. Well, there's John Henry that actually existed, and I think there is some thing that he did exist. Also, Johnny Appleseed is another one, where you have people that probably really did indeed exist, but the stories about them have grown and grown and grown and gotten taller as they get told and retold. There may have very well, there's a lot of talk about the people who originally wrote the tales of Paul Bunyan, the lumberjack, where, it was based on a real guy that was one of the best lumberjacks ever at the time. There's this kernel of truth of a real person, but they may not necessarily have the same name. And there's a lot of times where you take these various myths and these ideas and you kind of bring them together. And I'm trying to recall that the time before the Romans invaded and tried to crush the rebellion in Jerusalem in 60 AD to 70 AD, when that happened and leading up to it, there were Messianic figures everywhere. One of the main complaints of the Romans was they always were dealing with Messianic rebels that were drawing people to themselves and trying to lead a revolt against the Roman army. And I'm beginning to wonder that if the Gospels and Jesus himself aren't, shall we say, a conglomeration of a lot of other Messianic figures that may have existed, and then all of a sudden the Christians begin to reconceive them and put them together and slowly add them on. This kind of lines up with the Gospels, because when you look at all the Gospels and you put them, including the ones that aren't canonical, that didn't make the final four cut by the church, when you look at all of them and you put them in chronological order, it's like this increase in material. Things keep getting added and added and added, and the farther away it gets from the quote-unquote original events, it gets to be a real huge tall tale. I mean, by the time you get to the Gospel of Peter, you've got a talking cross and a whole bunch of other stuff. Whereas in the beginning, you just talk about maybe some Gnostic writers writing down some of the teachings of this person known as Jesus. And then slowly but surely, it's like everything there's adding here and here and here. And I can't help but wonder if maybe Jesus of Nazareth is the original kernel character, and then a whole bunch of other people that were also Messianic figures started to take tales and stories and weirdness that they had heard about that character and added it to this legend. And so I'm still wrestling with this idea of whether Jesus Christ was a real man. There is some doubts either way, but it's possible. He could be a myth, completely made up, fictitious character, and then all the Gospels are just this adding together. Suddenly we have a Hercules, a Perseus, but in Christian garb, okay? And a Jewish man who creates his own religion that eventually it's called Christianity. And you have all these different elements, these different Messianic figures that did things, taught things. Maybe one of them got baptized by some guy named John. Oh, we're going to add that to this Messianic figure that we created. Or is it a growing legend where we do have this kernel figure, but as the gospel writers, they keep adding more stuff that may have been inspired by other Messianic figures or just tales that were going around about Jesus of Nazareth? The point of the matter is, and the final point I'm going to get to, is there is so much doubt about who Jesus is and whether the Gospels even present even a remote hint of accuracy. I know you Christians out there think it's accurate, perfect, word for word, whatever, okay? The problem is, as I stated at the beginning, I did the Tall Tale of Jesus, a series that I gave up on because I was saying the same thing every single time. No, you really only have one witness here. You really only have one witness here. You don't even have two or three like Jesus, like the Bible commands in the Old Testament law. You don't even have two or three witnesses. You really only have one. Because only Matthew talks about the Magi. Only Luke talks about the actual shepherds in the field. Every resurrection account seems to be different with a different spin on it. And Mark doesn't even have a resurrection account. So did he rise from the dead, or is that an addition? It's obviously an addition to me. The point of the matter is that the way the Gospels are written, the way the whole situation was at that time, he could be a man, he could be a myth, and he could be a legend. He could be a mixture of all three. Who knows? But that's the point. should we really trust in something that has so much ambiguity around it, so much quote unquote mystery around it, so much weirdness around it, where it is quite possible that what we believe in is nothing more than an amalgamation of all these messianic stories that some writers, plural, started to put together. I'm now beginning to think that there's just, I know a lot of people like to fight about, whether he was a myth or whether he was an actual person, and I've seen atheists debate this. And I'm like, I don't think it matters, okay, because all the other claims are what matters. Did he rise from the dead? No, there's no evidence for that. Well, there's no body. There wouldn't be a body either if you did a mass grave after a crucifixion and threw him in with a bunch of other bodies. How would you identify Jesus of Nazareth in the midst of 100 other bodies that have been crucified and buried? I mean, I'm not trying to be rude here, but the point of the matter is there's no body because lots of bodies haven't survived for 2,000 years. Okay, it doesn't mean that those people didn't exist, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they did. Okay, there has to be something more than this claim that the Gospels make as to who this Jesus character was. And see, my problem is I studied and taught the life of Christ so many times. And the more I studied it, the more I talked about it, the more I realized, man, there's just so many holes here. There's so many unanswered questions. Every time I would teach the life of Christ, the more I began to be convinced that Jesus, a lot of this was just made up. I became very, very convinced that the resurrection accounts are all made up, okay, or they're different. I mean, they're all over the place. John completely goes off the rails and hardly does any stories that are the same with the other three gospel writers. The birth narrative, only one witness. It's like you guys are adding stuff because as people began to ask questions and question this new faith, the gospel writers said, "Oh, I got to write a story to answer that." I think the best one is Matthew. Isn't it possible that your disciples just stole the body? Oh, I got to put that at the end of my gospel where I say, really what happened was these temple, the Pharisees and all those guys that had Jesus put to death, they paid hush money to the guards, and that's why the story has gone around that the disciples just stole the body. And it's like, which is more believable, okay, that the disciples just made that story up to cover up the fact that maybe that they did steal the body, or that these people paid to have this whole cover up for a resurrection story where they could have just said the idea of somebody resurrecting from the dead is just ridiculous. Okay, which one is more likely? And the more I thought about it, so the more likely scenario is that the disciples stole the body, and now they made up this story about this hush money being given in order to cover up the fact that they stole the body. I guess what I'm saying is the answer to this question is so fuzzy and so weird. I don't know how anybody puts trust in the story. How do you put trust in a story that can't even verify itself, that contradicts itself, that doesn't have any more than just stories? This literally could be written as a mythology just as real as Hercules, Perseus, Theseus, all the other us's from the Greek tragedies and tales. Is he Odysseus, in Christian garb? I mean, my point is this. It is very possible that Jesus of Nazareth is nothing more than a Hercules story for Jews and Christians. And I'm not trying to be rude with that. I'm just saying it's really possible. My answer to the question, he might have been a man. It's possible that he's a myth. It is quite possible that he's a legend. But the one thing that is for certain, he is no son of God, and he's no savior. I want to thank you for stopping by. I want to thank you for just listening to me pontificate about this issue. I just want to bring everybody to speed. I know the last time I think I talked about this issue, I was still leaning on he was probably a historical character that they just added a bunch of legendary tall tale stuff. The more I study it, the more I do question whether he did exactly exist. And if he did, what exactly was he? Okay, he certainly wasn't this story that they've came up with, because the gospel accounts do contradict each other quite a bit. So there's a lot of things that happen there, particularly with the resurrection accounts. It just gets really weird. And I just want everybody to understand where I stand now, because I think it's a good discussion point. But I'd be interested in your thoughts, so put them down in the comments. Thanks once again for stopping by. Like the video, share the video, comment on the video. But most importantly, if you want to support the channel, subscribe to it, hit that notification bell. The more likes, shares, and all that stuff I get, the closer and closer I get to being monetized. I'm starting to support myself through this channel, which is something that every old ex-preacher would dream about, to take some of the skills that he gained as a preacher and put them to use in a different field. So I do appreciate everything that you people do. All my success is due to you and you liking the videos and doing what you do. So thank you once again. I appreciate you stopping by. I hope you have a good day, and I'll see you next time.